Hey everyone, welcome to our deep dive live stream for update 1.8, which is going to be releasing on September 17th for Company of Heroes 3. My name is John. I am the community manager on the team, and of course, I'm joined by Will Ward, senior designer.
Hello.
So as we noted, folks, in our fall and winter roadmap, update 1.8 is going to be a little bit smaller than our next two updates, but it will still be impactful, and it'll definitely include some fun new maps and important multiplayer balance changes. We'll be talking to Jason and Darren about that after our chat with Will. And of course, you can check out that roadmap for more details and to see what's coming over the next few months. But Will, let's get right into it with all the work that you've done for update 1.8. Where do you want to start? Do you want us to maybe start with some of the quality of life improvements to the map pool in general?
Yeah, let's do it. Yeah, so as we've mentioned before on our other live streams, we are continually pulling in feedback from the community. We have opened up individual map sections on our official Discord. So if you have any feedback for any of our maps currently in the live game, we are welcomely accepting anything that you have to say. Mm-hmm. There are going to be opinions on maps. As always, we know that. We know some are more popular than others, but all feedback is good feedback. It gives us plenty of awareness on whether there are very minor issues that can just be ironed out, or if there are major issues that require overhauls. And we have maps that are lined up for overhauls, as we've also mentioned before. In this patch, our major overhaul is of the two Pacino maps. Okay. So the 1v1 and the 2v2 versions of Pacino. Notably, there is an area on the west side of the map which has high ground and a house that isn't mirrored on the other side of the map. This was a very early developed map before we even had a height bonus system. So it stands to reason that something like this needs to be ironed out. So we have reduced the height of that. We have added a little staircase so you can cut through that big retaining wall. And we've adjusted the cover and the flow, the blockers in that entire area. So hopefully you will find these changes much improve the flow of the map in that area. Mm-hmm. Again, if there's any feedback that you have, even of the changes, then that is also welcome.
Okay, and I know we made a couple changes to Villa Fiore and Faymanville as well.
We did, yes. Just only minor bug fixes. Faymanville had an issue with the site blocking hedges right near the central house, which have now been adjusted to prevent units from firing through the back of a hedgerow, which is not intentional. And Villa Fiore still had one stone archway, which didn't allow certain team weapons to go through it, which has now been adjusted by a pixel to fix it. Okay. Sometimes that is all it takes.
So Will, I know we sort of started these quality of life improvements and bug fixes in Onyx Shark, our last major update. Do we have more changes and improvements like this planned for the future?
Yeah, we do. Because this is a smaller update, I've limited myself to how many of the big things I work on. So, for example, not to spoil things, Mignano Summit is still on my list. If you aren't fully aware of Mignano Summit, it is the 3v3 version of Mignano Gap. It was launched at the very beginning of the game's lifespan because we wanted to make sure there was an extra 3v3 map in there, but you can tell that it is not designed to be a 3v3 map. It is far more pokey. It has some very aggressive gameplay towards the center, and it swings quite heavily. If you take control of the main resources, games can end quite fast.
Yeah.
That map is now near the top of my list for a revamp, and I mean a complete revamp. Okay. I don't want to remove it because I think it still has some value. I want to fix it.
Okay.
So that's the next one on my list, but that will not be for 1.8. That'll be coming in the near future.
Okay. And I know you've talked about that in the past, about especially in our map making 101 series, where you talked about how sometimes it would be easier to take a 4v4 map, shrink it down to a 3v3, versus taking one of the smaller maps and trying to blow it up.
Yeah.
Okay, so everyone, of course, can continue leaving us their feedback on our existing and new maps in the map feedback section of the official Discord. Because I know, Will, you spend a lot of time there combing through all of the comments.
Do. And I have only one rule. If you lose a match and you leave feedback, I will take it with a pinch of salt. Feedback is for winners.
Winners only. Joking aside, though, Will, I know we're very appreciative of all the feedback that our
We are.
players are leaving us. And again, I think the work that you've done over the last few months to improve some of the existing maps goes to show that. But of course, the shiny and new exciting stuff for update 1.8, we have 3 new maps coming to the map pool. Let's start with our 2v2. Can you introduce us to this map, Will?
Yes. So our 2v2 is a map called Road to Primasol. This is a real spur of the moment map because we have a nice backlog of maps that I designed over the years. In fact, when we launched the game, I had a big collection, maybe 12 map designs that I wanted to build over time, and they're very basic, very grey boxy. There's no detail to them, but they are the basic layouts like Territory. But occasionally along comes an idea, and that idea just fast tracks to the very beginning of the queue. And this was one of those maps. I was doing a bit of research and I saw some photographs of a very rundown and dilapidated manor house in Sicily near Primasol, which was a major bridge during the Allied invasion of Sicily. So immediately that just sent creative juices flowing and I had to build it. So the history of this one, this map, is the British airborne landed near the Primasol bridge on the morning or kind of late night of the invasion of Sicily, and were immediately beset with troubles. The weather was very poor, so a lot of gliders got blown off course. The flak was extremely heavy in the area, and they lost a lot of gliders. A lot of men never reached the ground.
Yep.
And then by the time that they landed and were trying to secure a foothold, they had no reinforcements anywhere near them because the inclement weather also didn't help the beach landings. So Road to Primasol is based on the allies that are rushing to save their airborne forces and being ambushed along that route.
Okay.
They had very few ground transports. It was very slow going, and the weather was extremely hot. So it is just a very unique story, and we wanted to capture that in this map.
So just a total tangent. I know you mentioned the gliders that the paratroopers were using. I had the chance to go to Pegasus Bridge in Normandy quite a few years ago, and seeing how close those gliders landed to the German positions, I was just like, this must have been absolute chaos. This would have been a nightmare of an engagement.
Terrifying. Terrifying.
Definitely not a job I would have wanted if I was in the military. So let's maybe talk about your approach to designing Road to Primasol here.
Yeah, so when I went into this design, I went in with the theme first. So the territory came second. Doesn't mean that the territory is going to be bad necessarily, but sometimes it's easier to shape the map. I knew I wanted to have this manor house, which sits kind of in the north corner of the map, with these beautiful gardens and open spans and driveways with a little bit of raised ground, almost on a plateau. But I was also at the time reminiscing some of our old maps, like McGechan's War or Hedgerow Siege from Company of Heroes 1. We don't have many maps with big hedgerows, and I really wanted to lean into that with this map. So the lower ground is a rural area strewn with vineyards and groves, but it's all bisected with hedgerows. So you have two halves of this map. You have very open ground on the manor estate, and then you have the low ground, which is very dense and overgrown. So more close quarters on the low ground in the rural area. And from then on, everything snaps together. It's so easy to fill those spaces when you have two nice themes that work together.
So as a player, how should I be approaching my matches on this map?
Because it's a 2v2, you're obviously going to be relying on your teammate. And it is a map very much of two halves. The lower half being quite overgrown is going to be quite close quarters. There are some very commanding positions, like long roads, for example, that have great sightlines cutting through there. So holding those checkpoints with AT guns and machine guns is going to be very key. But that entire lower area is being overlooked by the manor. So having control of that high ground and having control of the manor itself is going to be extremely valuable. But this is a map where you can very much abandon one half if you must to focus focus down a teammate or focus down an enemy, I should say, on one half of the map. But with the way that the territory layout has been set up, if you abandon the manor, for example, the cutoff for all of the south and southern resources is just outside that manor. It's on
see.
a main road.
Right.
So if you completely neglect your flank, you are at risk of losing everything.
Yeah.
So it's got a bit of a spice to it. This is going to be a fun map to watch for rotations. And
Yeah.
seeing people go around the outskirts of the map just to try and cut off and then make a dive through the lowlands.
Yeah, and I saw an interesting note that you had as well about sort of the toss-up between the height advantage of the manor versus some of the victory points in the lower parts of the map. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see the decision making that players have to make.
Yeah, absolutely. And 2v2s are just made for this. 2v2s are some of my favorite matches to watch. Because although it's nowhere near as chaotic as a 4v4, you can see tactics rolling out very methodically in 2v2s. And as long as you are working together with your teammate, there's some fantastic gambits that you can pull off.
Okay, very cool. So that is Road to Permisol, our new 2v2, and we forgot to mention it up top, but this is going to be coming to Quick Match, Co-op versus AI, Skirmish, and of course, custom game modes. So Will, let's talk about our 3v3. What is this?
So, another little bit of a history lesson. One of the maps that I've wanted to make for a long time was the Battle of Longstop Hill. Longstop Hill was a mountain, essentially, on the outskirts of Tunisia. And it was where the American and British forces were pushing from the west of North Africa across to Tunis in an attempt to try and cut off Rommel when he was retreating from the east side of North Africa. So we had very, very green and inexperienced American troops who had already suffered at Kasserine Pass, for example, and British forces that either hadn't been tried and tested yet or had recovered from earlier battles in North Africa and had been redeployed on the other side. They came across this mountain and it was a nightmare of a position to try and take. It was very exposed, it was very rocky, and it was too steep for the vast majority of the vehicles to even get close to climbing. So when the Churchill tanks started rolling out, it was discovered that that was the only vehicle that they had, the only tank at least, that could climb such a steep escarpment. And it was a complete game changer for the entire battle. But when you look at Longstop Hill in real life, it's actually a mountain of many different biomes. It has very, very lush low ground. It's almost boggy. It's filled with greenery. It's like you wouldn't believe that it's North Africa at all if you were under the impression that North Africa was mostly desert. But then it becomes very rocky. It becomes more mountainous, and then it's barren on the top. So it really does go through some quite dramatic changes as you go up these different levels. And there's loads of beautiful ruins and old settlements, ancient settlements built into the mountainside. Quite a fascinating place to fight over. But it had a commanding view of Tunisia.
Okay.
So it was worth taking. It was an important location to take.
Okay, so Longstop Hill will be coming to Skirmish and custom game modes only, right?
Yes. No. This will be available for all modes.
Okay, my mistake. So Quick Match, Co-op versus AI, Skirmish, and custom games. Perfect. So tell me about your design with this map as well, and your approach to designing it. Because again, it sounds like it's a pretty challenging sort of historical sort of backdrop for this map, and in terms of like the changes in the biomes and the elevation. So how did you approach this one?
Yeah. So this is another lesson really in how to make big maps not be completely boring. Because you don't want to use too many biomes because it will feel unrealistic. But when you come across an environment like this that has lush, rocky, barren at the different heights of the mountain, it kind of works. It feels like it's natural because it flows from one to the other. So this map, being a hill map, has the summit in the north corner, and the players are fighting over the different tiers. So you're fighting either in the lowlands against your opponent, in the middle, and then on the height and the summit.
Okay.
So it isn't like a traditional hill map where everyone's rushing towards the very center of the map, and that's where the hill is. It's on a skew. So you can usually tell where you are in the map by what kind of biome that you're fighting in. So the more lush and green it is, you're in the lowlands. If it's more urban and built up and rocky, then you're in the center. And then if it's barren and militarized, then you're up at the top with all the trenches and bunkers and emplacements. But this map is this was another very fun one to work on. It has very distinct lanes, so you end up running into usually being teamed up on this map because it's 3v3. But there are so many different avenues of approach. It's not just 3 lanes. I believe there's 5 across the whole map. So there's plenty of flanking maneuvers. There's lots of height differentiation between the different layers. And neglecting any one of these lanes can be devastating if you aren't watching your flank.
Okay. So considering how laney this map is, how should I be approaching it with my team?
As with all team games, it devolves into chaos very quickly. You can obviously hold your lane, your one lane, and bunker it down as much as you can. But again, because there are more lanes than there are players, you aren't going to be able to hold every single location. Some of the locations are also harder to hold than others. So the very north and the very south are extremely hard to hold because they're further away from your bases. The south, for example, I've never seen a game where that's held for very long. MG teams and AT guns, for example, will just get overrun because you can't support them because you're trying to protect the next lane and protect your units from being flanked at there. The same goes for the north. The north has a lot of heavy cover. It has bunkers and emplacements, but is also quite easily flanked. So if you commit units to the extreme north or the extreme south, you are almost always going to get cut off. It's very, very difficult to hold those locations. The middle of the map with the central town is always a slog. It's always going to be a massacre because it's the closest point between the two teams. It's the easiest location to send forces. But because there's a lot of cliffs, dense hedgerows, ruins, indirect fire is usually going to be the order of the day. It's also a team game map, so we know that things like heavy mortars and artillery come into their play here. I'm intrigued to see how this map devolves. I do want to see how players take to it. It's very different to what we've released thus far. It could be very popular or messy.
Yeah, I imagine height gameplay will play a factor because of the changes in elevation as well.
Yes, although less so than you might think, because players are essentially starting on the same layer as each other.
Okay.
Your forces will meet on level ground, but if you lose one of those layers, then you're fighting an uphill battle.
Gotcha.
So if you lose the north and you're trying to push up to it, you are pushing uphill all the way.
Okay.
But again, it's difficult to hold those locations because of how far away they are.
Right. All right. Sounds challenging, but looking forward to playing some more on that. Let's talk about our next map, and I think we're both very happy because we're making a return to including some amazing maps from our community map makers. Let's talk about this first one, our 4v4.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, it's a pleasure to get the community map train rolling again. We'd invited people to start working on community maps again as soon as we possibly could. It is a labor of love. We do appreciate that if you're a community mapper, this is something that takes a very, very long time, and we do greatly appreciate all the effort that you put into these. This map in particular is a 4v4 map as well, which is a huge undertaking. And it's Alam El Halfa, which was created by Sphinx, who also created Steps for us, the remake of Steps that we released earlier. It's a beautiful map. Sphinx is an artist. It's gorgeous, and it was a huge amount of work.
Yeah, and this is also coming to all game modes.
It is indeed.
Okay. So a quick word from Sphinx on creating this map. Sphinx says, "It is a real joy for all mappers to see community maps being added to AutoMatch. I originally didn't intend to make another big map because it takes a lot of time to fill in a 4v4 with detail. But Will's ongoing interaction and feedback with map makers and Relic wanting to add more community maps to the game are a wonderful motivation, despite all the time it takes. The initial idea was to create a desert map with a large tank battle at its center, open but full of options to fight from cover to cover. I always start in the middle and build the rest of the map around it. Bit by bit, the rest of the map came together with some added inspiration from the KOTOR map. I'm going to butcher this pronunciation. Viesalum? Which included a town and an open industrial section.
I know the map. I also don't know the pronunciation.
Please be gentle in the comments. Will, Sphinx obviously put a lot of work into Alam El Halfa before we approached him to get it into the game. So what additional things did you collaborate on together with Sphinx to get it ready for the auto match pool?
Honestly, this is one of those maps that didn't need much touching at all. It was already at a very high standard. But as I've mentioned before, whenever we take a community map on, I do what's called a V3 pass. So it's the final design pass, which we would normally do on all of our maps anyway. And that includes playtesting to make sure that things like impasse and cover are where they should be, making sure that performance is good, and then just simply verifying that everything is working as intended before we do the final art assets like the custom mini maps and adding audio and things like that. This map did have some significant performance issues, but that was of no fault to Sphinx. In fact, relatively funny story. Sphinx is so unique in his design or his approach to design that he uncovered a very nasty bug for us. That there was a memory leak every time that you saved.
Oh, geez. Okay. Glad he found that.
As a guy who does a few minor things whenever he has time and then saves and then goes and does something else and comes back a couple of minor things, saves and then goes and does something else, he must have saved in excess of 200 or 300 times, maybe more. Yeah. And every single time he was saving, it was duplicating entities, things in the map, objects in the map, to the point that a map that only had a few thousand objects in it looked like it had millions, which was a huge performance drain and was crashing, which thankfully led to us finding a fix.
Yeah. Hashtag game dev things.
Yeah, like you can't make this stuff up. But yeah, otherwise, this is a masterclass in community map design. This was a wonderful map to look at. It has some very, very distinct themes. As he mentions, the vast open space in the middle, which is where a tank battle has already occurred. Loads of good cover and positions, but it is very open. But then that is flanked by an outskirt of rocky outcroppings and site blockers. So you've got loads of room to maneuver around that central area. And then on the west side, you've got a beautiful built-up town. And then on the east side, you've got an airfield. So you've got very distinct themes that you can call out to your teammates whenever you are in need of support. You can say exactly where you are and people know where it is. The problem with desert maps is it can sometimes all look like desert and it's hard to identify location. Yeah, it's beautiful. It's great.
Okay. I think this was also a competition winner, wasn't it?
It was. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
I've been watching this map for a long time.
So we all know 4v4s can be a bit chaotic, but how would you approach matches on Sphinx's map here?
It's going to be hard to give any advice outside of 4v4 does 4v4 things.
Yeah.
The center of this map is going to be a massacre regardless of how you look at it. And it's going to be so hard to push through this space because it is so open. So as soon as you get 17 pounders and flak 88s into this position, they're going to absolutely dominate. But thankfully, a lot of the resources are towards the outskirts of the map. So I think we're going to see some of the most aggressive pushes on these areas. The middle of the map is going to be a joy to watch. It's going to be a nightmare to push through.
Okay. Very cool. So I think that's going to wrap things up for our new maps here. But again, we have the 2v2 Road to Primsol, the 3v3 Long Stop Hill, and the 4v4 Alam El Halfa, authored by community member Sphinx, all coming to all game modes with update 1.8. Will, what are you sort of most excited about to see from players once they get their hands on these maps?
I mean, I always say I can't wait just to see how people interpret it, how they play in their own way on these maps. Always on release day, I'm watching live streams constantly, just trying to gather feedback. It's such a rich environment of feedback and just watching how people, their first impressions of these new locations that take so long to build. I can't wait. I can never wait. It's so much fun. I hope you all enjoy them.
So as we usually do with new maps, we will be increasing their matchmaking weight just for the first couple of weeks after release. So that way players have a better chance of coming across them in the auto match game modes. But of course, we will change that back down to their normal weighting after a couple of weeks has ended. But again, Will, thank you so much for taking the time to go over all of this with us. And of course, the doing that additional work to for quality of life changes and bug fixes for some of our existing maps. And I know you've got more of that in the hopper, ready to go for future updates. I know 1.9 and our second anniversary update are coming quick, and I'm sure you got a
Absolutely.
lot of work.
Oh
ahead of
yeah,
you.
yeah. No, I am busy mapping away. There's lots and lots to do.
Okay, so we will end things there, and then we will kick it over to Jason and Darren.
Thanks, folks.
And now I'm joined by Jason and Darren from the Balance team to talk about the multiplayer changes coming in Update 1.8. Welcome, both of you. Let's do some quick introductions for those that don't know you. Jason, who are you?
Hello, I'm Jason. I'm leading Balance and Company of Heroes 3.
And Darren?
Hey, my name's Darren Chen, and I'm one of the gameplay designers for Company of Heroes 3.
So, Jason, I know we've talked about sort of major versus minor balance updates in the past, but can you maybe cover the difference between those again, and what we maybe did in Onyx Shark and what we're going to be doing this time around?
Yeah. So in the previous patch, which was a major patch, we did a across the game overhaul of the infantry combat in the game. So we did a large shift to a large portion of the game, and has obviously had a large impact on the game. This patch, minor patch or like a stabilization patch, mostly is to follow up on what issues have arisen, to fix spot issues by fixing them specifically. And we're trying to avoid large systematic changes so we can tighten the balance up a little bit before the next patch, where we then do another systematic change to another large part of the game. Yeah.
Okay. And Darren, I imagine we're sort of following up on a lot of the changes that we made to Time to Kill, which was a big thing in 1.7.
There are a number of changes for Time to Kill that we have done, mainly for not just a couple of the main line. Well, actually, just one of the main lines to be exact. Mostly everyone else around the main lines has gotten some adjustments, either in durability, firepower. It all depends on the type of unit. So we have tightened up some of the infantry that have been suffering since Time to Kill, but
Okay.
in particular, we have looked at one area for 1.8, and that is light vehicles.
Okay, so let's maybe just get right into it. I know someone on the design team once said that the cadence between these updates is kind of like an accordion. It's kind of always going back and forth with sort of the bigger changes that we make, and then sort of re-stabilizing as we follow up on those changes. So let's get right into it with light vehicles. Jason, do you want to cover this at a high level?
Yeah. And one of the reasons why we have this like large small structure is because kind of doing a large shift, there's only so much a small team like us can predict into the future. For example, this light vehicle thing, result of TTK, has been very much a big surprise, because if you think about it, we kind of buffed all of the infantry units in the game, but the end result was, at least in certain matchups, right? Not all matchups, but light vehicles became much more dominant, even though relatively speaking, they should be weaker. Now, we do understand now, after we've seen a lot of games, why that is the case, but going into the patch thinking, hey, we're making all infantry do more damage. No, we're not. It's really hard to connect that idea in the future of like, well, that will make light vehicles really dominant. But now we kind of get it, and we'll talk about a little bit more specifics later. But yeah, so one of the major things this patch will be to address kind of the dominance of light vehicles in some of the matchups, especially in the smaller game modes. That'll be very important. We also have some other smaller systematic changes, like we've increased infantry rifles to have some amount of penetration on the range attenuation, which in English means the closer a vehicle gets to you, the more penetration a rifle will have.
Okay.
And this is only relevant to light ultralights, so like things like the Dingo, the 4x4, and other little vehicles like that. And the final, like, kind of general change is that we've made salvage quite a lot better for everyone. So a lot of different factions in different ways have access to salvage. And now that salvage is standard for all of them, and they all get different, or now it's significantly better.
Okay. Darren, any sort of follow up on some of those changes to light vehicles or the penetration changes? Any additional thoughts there?
I think we'll get to that when we start with the main body of the patch notes.
Okay.
But for the light vehicles, it's not just been the light vehicles we've wanted to address, but it also goes into this thing where we do want there to be also a slightly longer gap where you play with your infantry before, these shock vehicles hit the field, and, your entire game plan has to change, or you need to start rushing out counter units to deal with them.
Yeah.
Okay. So I know we're the patch notes, which we're going to release the day that the update goes live. Those are obviously going to have a lot more detail on the changes that are coming. But maybe we can cover some of the more bigger ones or the more impactful ones, I guess.
Yeah.
Jason, I know you mentioned some changes, or Darren rather, you mentioned some spot changes to address TTK. But what do we want to cover there?
It's going to be on a faction by faction basis, but for some examples that we've done is like for the USF, their engineers are going to be more durable to make up for the fact they are not the most deadly of the units, or Royal Engineers for the British have their damage drop off extended so they can deal more damage without on both the chase and you don't need to get as close to maximize their damage. Where units like the Pioneers, it gets a little bit of both just so it doesn't die as fast because that unit dies very fast in TTK. Where Deutsche Afrika Korps has units like the Panzer Grenadier deals a little bit more at medium and long range just because that unit has trouble closing in with the new TTK, and Panzer Pioneers themselves are a little bit more durable to make up for the fact they are one of the more expensive engineering units in the game.
Okay. Jason, what about some of the other sort of more general changes that are coming?
So, and to kind of elaborate, because the notes aren't out for the light vehicles, one of the biggest general changes is that the fuel cost of them have just increased. There's a few reasons behind this, but the biggest one was we wanted to slow down the strength of building multiple light vehicles. Now, the cost changes of a lot of these are like, for example, plus 10 fuel, which for your first vehicle isn't a tremendous amount. But if you think about your second and your third and your fourth, this is when this nerf will start to accumulate.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the purpose. In a similar vein, some of them have had their pop caps increased. And we'll talk about that later. But it's a similar vein where having one or two pop cap added to a unit won't make your first unit that much different. However, if you get a second, a third, and a fourth, now you're multiplying the nerf that we're adding. Hopefully, we're leaning more towards nerfing the builds of light vehicles getting multiplied versus if you're just getting one to kind of augment your strategy, right? We have a large emphasis on these like mixed builds, and we've seen the meta get taken over by these spam builds of like take a really good unit and just run your opponent over with a certain timing or with a certain attack, and we're trying to get those out of the way.
Okay. What other sort of major things are we going to be targeting this time around?
I mean, so for that's the big one, and I think we should probably get into the factions.
Sure.
And start talking about how we specifically did that for some of the more problematic units.
Yeah.
So yeah, let's start straight with USF. And the two light vehicles, the Chaffee and the Greyhound, have both received big changes. The Chaffee in particular has had its fuel cost increased, its pop cap increased, its penetration especially at point blank slightly decreased, and its seek and destroy vet ability no longer gives movement. So now rather than choosing from a bigger movement speed buff and a movement speed buff with the reveal, now you have to choose one or the two. You either get the reveal or not.
Okay.
So that's the whole set of changes for Chaffee. And for the Greyhound, the cost is getting changed slightly. So the fuel's going up, but the manpower is actually going slightly down. The pop cap is going up, and we nerfed the AoE on the main gun, so it's more reliant on the machine gun. So this is, these two vehicles have seen a lot of play in 1v1 in particular, and they've kind of taken over the game. The fuel cost is hopefully going to make it so that getting multiple of them isn't as good. The pop cap's similar vein. The penetration nerf for the Chaffee is to prevent nullifying armor by just running at people, at least as much it was before. So those are two major changes for USF vehicles.
Okay. Darren, what else are we doing with the USF?
For USF, we're also doing a few additional changes. Like I said, we've done some things to make the faction a little bit less reliant on riflemen as just building them like 4 rifles and no other unit from your HQ. So we have done changes like buff the US engineers durability, which also goes in part with the buffs we've done to flamethrowers to allow USF to start cracking open bunkers and covered positions earlier, as well as like making the scout build faster so they can play a more map control heavy game rather than one where they're looking for engagements. And a more minor one, though it is major in the sense that your ASC will no longer have a cooldown shared between the strafes and the bombing run. So as long as you can feed munitions into your ASC, you can use whatever ability you want, because it didn't really make too much sense to gate both abilities because you already have the initial munitions gate on the abilities that kind of prevents spamming unless you invest very heavily into your ASC early.
Right.
Yeah.
So that sounds like a pretty nice buff for the Air Sports Center.
One general change that's quite relevant here for the team players, team game players, sorry, is we've made flamethrowers much more effective against bunkers. So before they kind of tickle them, they're mostly to clear the bunker. We've changed this to make it so that the flamethrower itself will be decent damage to the bunker buildings.
Oh, okay.
Which should allow certain builds for USF to deal easier with very fast bunker builds. We're very aware that the fast bunker builds in team games is an issue, and we're still going to look at it. But this is one change in that direction that we're trying to fix it with.
Okay. So it's like hopefully I stop getting a lot of bunker mentions in my spam or in my mentions there.
Yeah.
Cool. Do we want to move on to the Vermox?
Yes. So the Wehrmachts have seen a lot of more smaller changes. To highlight here, I think we'll just highlight maybe 2 or 3 of the biggest ones. The biggest one is probably the Pioneers have gotten a significant durability bonus, where they're going to be much more effective against like other support units, like the Scout in particular. But also just in general, they'll be much harder, or not much harder, but they'll be harder to lose, which is important because we've noticed that, especially with the TTK changes, sometimes your Pioneers can kind of just disappear, which is not good. So that's one major change. The other set of changes is to the mechanized battle group. The 8-Rad, which has been terrorizing 1v1 play, has seen a few set of changes. The main the performance of the unit has been reduced. The 8-Rad's CP has also been increased, and the cost has been also increased. So a major set of changes to that. And kind of the reason why we changed it so heavily was because with the TTK changes, we've noted that the impact of the light vehicle can be really high. And we've noted just, for example, in a lot of these games, the 8-Rad is such a powerful unit combined with something like Mechanized Assault can just win the game on its own,
Yeah.
which is a notable shift from what it was kind of before. So this is why we're nerfing it so heavily.
Okay.
You want to talk about the Mechanized Assault change?
Well, it's a major change in the sense, but the number it's doing it was pretty fast. It was just we lowered the amount of health you're regenning before you could essentially absorb on a very good day, and depending on the unit, around 3 anti-tank hits. It's depending on how fast and when you were getting that extra health. Now at maximum, you should only be able to absorb one extra anti-tank gunshot max. So it's a very significant nerf to mechanized assault's healing, because one of the big things about this ability should be, you keep your vehicle with your infantry for that big combat boost, but most of the time people are just rushing in vehicles with mechanized assault, solely to tank up damage and try to win the game by, killing the opponent's anti-tank guns or winning the engagement in a
Right. So,
tank fight.
you can't be as reckless with Mechanized Assault anymore.
Yeah.
Okay.
That reckless with lots of vehicles with it. It still should be quite a good ability if you're using it in the
Right.
way we intended it to be used.
Okay. Sounds good. Should we move on to the British?
Yeah. You
Okay.
want to cover them?
The British have gotten a number of adjustments. Some also include TTK. Hey, we did do some changes to the Gurkhas and Commandos to make their short range a lot better. Well, maybe not a lot better, but better than it was before, because TTK has hurt assault units in particular, as they have to close that distance. We've also did some changes to, say, their artillery. It's easier to get their artillery, but in terms of nerfs of the faction has gotten, we have made the Matilda a little bit worse against infantry, mainly on direct hits. We are noticing on a good day, if a Matilda just scored a direct hit on a squad, there is a very good chance it could also just wipe out the squad. And that's a little bit too much, given that the Matilda both fires fast and also has fairly low scatter. And we've also done an adjustment to the Dingo, and some other light vehicles have gotten this change. We've adjusted their moving performance to be roughly the same against infantry, but we have made their moving performance worse against, say, other ultralight vehicles. We noticed that a lot of the fights between ultralights in the early game could end up in the result of one person just loses their ultralight on the chase, because
Yeah.
both sides would just rush their vehicle forward when there was a gap and run the opponents down.
It would be really volatile, right? Where like players admittedly would play really well right on the edge, but we've noticed that the difference would be or the gap would widen too quickly. So we've made it so that if you're chasing a 250 with a dingo or vice versa, it will take slightly longer for them to kill each other.
Okay.
So you just have a little bit more room to play with them compared to before.
Okay. Any additional British thoughts, or should we move on to the Africa Corps?
For the British, they're mostly where they are now. They haven't gotten major changes. They're probably one of our most stable factions in the games, just because of how their kit it is. So they mainly got more minor adjustments compared to some of the other factions in their
Okay.
toolkit.
Sounds good. So Africa Corps, what's happening with our friends in the desert?
So the Africa Corps have actually gotten quite a few small changes. We're not going to cover all of them here, but some highlights. For example, the Panzergrens or the Palm Grenadiers and the Panzer Pioneers have both received a base performance increase. We've noted that with the TTK changes that their units weren't quite keeping up. So, for example, the Palm Grenadiers have a little bit more damage, and the Panzer Pioneers have a little bit more tank added to them. Also, we've made a lot of changes to their tier 2. A lot of those units have been touched, but the biggest one would be the 254 has gotten much more expensive, but also significantly better recon. So right before, it was kind of this really cheap unit that could do one job very specifically kind of okay. Now we want to make it a little bit more of like it's really good at what it does, but you actually kind of need to properly invest in getting the unit. So that's what we're doing with it. You want to talk about the other changes?
Yep. We've also done speaking of changes to some of the DAC units, the flak track, we noted that we kind of like where it is as a damage dealer, but the flak was a little bit too oppressive against infantry, mainly because you could still move away from a combat, but also outright nullify the infantry with suppression. So
yeah.
now we've changed it so if the flak track wants to suppress, it needs to be stationary, which
Okay.
should give infantry more opportunities to push this. It's on their own, or just have other units push the flak and make it less effective against infantry. We've also done some changes to rein in the LEIG, which was a little bit overperforming. It should have been on par with the pack howitzer, but there were a number of stat differences that just made it fire faster, and because of the damage payload it has, it was a bit too lethal to team weapons and infantry, despite also being a core unit in the army.
Yeah.
And outside that we have made some pretty significant change to the Assault Grenadier. Less so in their raw DPS, but now their assault grenades themselves should be pretty dangerous. Before, there were chances where the assault grenade could hit you, but you really didn't care about it. But now the assault grenade has been changed it should essentially force their opponent to move or risk losing a unit.
Okay. First, I just want to say I like that we're officially, at least internally, calling them the Palm Grenadiers. that once the players picked up on that, and I don't think we're going to change their official name. I feel like that's more of a production decision, as there's some work involved there. But Palm Grenadiers is great, so thank you very much for that. Jason, any other sort of big picture thoughts on the changes to the Africa Corps here?
No, I think that sums up Africa Corps, but kind of commenting on as a whole, like what players should kind of expect is, like some players probably already can kind of see the impact of some of the changes. But yeah, the main things we've targeted is making light vehicles in our smaller games kind of not be as powerful when they're spammed. We've changed some things like flamethrowers to make them a little bit more effective. Quite a lot of small spot changes for different units. DAC in particular, their 2 base infantry should be slightly better. All these are really minor changes, but we're hopefully this will make the meta slightly different, and see a lot of different builds that haven't been that viable come into the forefront, while some builds that people have clearly gotten tired of out of the way. So yeah, I hope people enjoy it, and we'll be again paying a lot of attention to how it lands and the feedback that we get for it.
Darren, any other final thoughts on update 1.8?
No, we're just hoping that, it does reduce some of the more toxic strategies in the game. It creates a little bit more unit diversity within the factions. Oh, there is. Do you want me to bring up a few things that I think we maybe missed? Or
Sure,
do-
go ahead.
Yeah, so we did forget to bring up this. There is salvaging, so we actually did a minor adjustment into that, but, well, minor in the sense you will now get 30% of the manpower of a wreck back, so
Okay.
it'll make the salvaging a bit more economical to use if you're not able to, like, recover a vehicle or you just want to break something down for manpower, so it should be able to cover a few reinforcements for your army throughout the course of the game, and I think the other one was the DAC bike now gives combined arms.
Oh yeah.
So now DAC will be able to go with not just only be forced to make 250s early game if they want their infantry to fight effectively. Their bike can either remain capturing on the line or can join on the battle line to give your units the combat buff they need.
Yeah, I've gotten so used to the bike and playtesting. I've kind of forgotten it's a dispatch thing.
Yeah,
But yeah, the bike thing should actually make quite a big difference in terms of what you can opt into as DAC. Normally, like most builds right now have to get a 250 to get your infantry to be active. The idea is to now to give you a little bit of an option to not have to do that. So
Okay.
Yeah.
Very cool. I'm going to throw you a bit of a curveball because I know we didn't prep for this. But is there anything that you're sort of keeping an eye on for our update in November or even the update after that in February?
I mean, there's quite a few things.
I mean,
we're
I'm
keeping
sure there's
an
always
eye
something,
on,
yeah.
but I mean, in terms of like, yeah, this is a curveball. Like one of the big things is one strat that I think team players probably care a lot about is bunker play. Now, not necessarily just coastal, to be very clear here. We have bunkers for a lot of different factions, and they all see varying different degrees of success and use.
Yep.
This is something that I've personally wanted to improve quite a lot, but it's difficult because every faction deals with them differently. Their counters arrive at different times, their different strengths, but this is something that we're definitely looking at. One other thing, and I mean, this is a bit of a preview, is kind of like the veterancy of a lot of our units don't quite fit their role. So, like, for example, I mean, maybe the USF Scout might get slightly different veterancy because right now they don't really scale that well into their recon role, right? So, nod, wink, wink, that probably might get changed. So, yeah, that's,
Okay.
yeah.
That's great. Appreciate the little sneak peek of what's to come. So, folks, that will do it for today. As always, if you want to stay up to date on all the latest Company of Heroes news, be sure to follow us Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and Twitch at Company of Heroes. You can find our forums at community.companyofheroes.com. That's also where we will be posting the patch notes the day that the update goes out. You can also join our Discord server at discord.gg/Company of Heroes. So don't forget to check out our fall and winter roadmap to see everything that's going to be coming in our next 3 updates. And of course, like I said, the 1.8 patch notes will go up on the forums the morning of September 17th. So keep an eye out for those. As always, thank you so much for watching. Thank you, Jason. Thank you, Darren. And we will see you folks on September 17th. So until then.